Channeling, I think, is something that we're all doing when we're tapped into our bliss, our joy, our way. We're all channeling energy when we're connected.
Today I am joined by an intuitive channeler by the name of Lee Harris. And today we're going to talk about his work called The Future Human and also his work as a very gifted intuitive channeler and healer.
There is a certain overview that guides have that we don't have. We're too in the weeds. We're too in the human drama, the human story, the human game. But they have the ability to help us see with a bird's eye view. And that can be very freeing. You are struggling with something and you get a message from a guide, your own guide, or through someone else as a messenger that helps you go, I see the bigger picture. I see why I'm so tightly wound around this thing, and it can help you release the energy around it. So I think channeling in and of itself can be a healing force and an educational force. But what I've noticed
Welcome to the Dr Espen podcast. I am your host, Espen. Today I am joined by an intuitive channeler by the name of Lee Harris. He has done some extensive work around the world, including with Gaia, where I recently presented. And today we're going to talk about his work called The Future Human and also his work as a very gifted intuitive channeler and healer. He leads a vibrant community online that reaches over 1 million people every single month. He's acclaimed online events and membership communities called The Portal. I think it's really pertinent based on our conversation today, which basically adventures into the deepest aspect of what we call living, what we call loving, and of course, this concept of awakening. He's also an accomplished music producer, so he knows energy, frequency, and vibration through the power of sound, and also a singer-songwriter, which is just beautiful as well. So I want to welcome to the show today, Lee Harris. How are you, buddy?
Hi, Espen. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
It is so good to be with you. Now, I know on behalf of my audience, many people now know that we're not alone in the universe. The human species is not the only species that exists in the multiverse. There is more at play than what we can experience with our five senses. And here we are with one of the world's best, as far as I'm concerned, gifted intuitive healers and channelers. Tell me a little bit about what you do at channeling. I think most people get the concept, but I'd love to know your version of it. Who are you channeling? What is channeling? Please take it away.
Great. So channeling, I think, is something that we're all doing when we're tapped into our bliss, our joy, our way. So, for example, someone who's a great musician or a great cook or a great, whatever your thing is. So I think we're all channeling energy when we're connected. Creativity is an act of channeling as far as I'm concerned. And so from a young age, I was very tapped into creativity. I was always creating. So that was my first kind of gateway. But the term channeling that we tend to view or understand at this time is when someone is channeling either their guides or another energy or another entity. So it's, in a way, you become the translator or the mouthpiece or the writer, the author of some other energy or being or guide. And I think people experience it wildly differently. For example, Tori Amos, who is a singer-songwriter I've loved for a long time, she speaks about the muses, and she experiences her songwriting where these muses will come to her and bring these songs to her. So she's very much in a channeling relationship, but she describes it slightly differently. And in fact, she was one of the first mainstream music artists to really use that language in quite a bold way 30 years ago, which really pricked up my ears because I thought, wow, she's putting some concepts in the mainstream that we aren't that familiar with. But I think now in 2025, and I've been doing this work, I first met my guides 25 years ago, and I've been doing it for work for 21. What a different time, not just around channeling, but around anything to do with well-being, anything to do with mental health, anything to do with physical fitness. The understanding that we now have around our wellness has rapidly grown since, I think, the freedom of the internet allowed more voices, more expressions. We have this massive map now of people who do all of these things. So we've also seen channeling become more popular. And why I think channeling is useful to people, having observed this, yes, there are some people who love the information that channels will bring. So there is a certain overview that guides have that we don't have. We're too in the weeds. We're too in the human drama, the human story, the human game. but they have the ability to help us see with a bird's eye view. And that can be very freeing. You are struggling with something and you get a message from a guide, your own guide, or through someone else as a messenger that helps you go, I see the bigger picture. I see why I'm so tightly wound around this thing. And it can help you release the energy around it. So I think channeling in and of itself can be a healing force and an educational force. But what I've noticed doing this around the world now is I feel like when you expose yourself to channeling, and usually the people who like channeling are already somewhat primed for it or somewhat into the idea, it has an osmosis effect. So I always believe that the more you spend time in and around something, the more you're cultivating your own ability to become that energy. And so I started to, in later years, notice, I think the reason people like immersing themselves in channeled energy is it's their way of getting back to their own higher self, their own soul, or sometimes meeting their guides. But I maintain that meeting your guides is not necessary for everybody. It's not everyone's way. It wasn't something I was looking for. I was very passionate about self-growth, spirituality, but I would never have thought I would hear my guides. And I would have expected it to be a little less normal if I did. My perception of people who did that was, wow, they must have, I don't know, been raw vegan for 8 years and doing yoga every day and breath work. Like I had a very fixed idea of how pure you might have to be to access that. And for me, I was 23. While I definitely was focused on healing and self-growth, I had so much self-doubt and at that time, a much harder relationship with self-attack. So I had all of that in my energy field as well, and yet still they came through. So my message is always to people, yeah, you can tap into spirit at any time, much like people sometimes think they have to be perfect to meet a romantic partner. No, the truth is the romantic partner will come in, and if they're the right fit for you, you'll do the work together. You don't have to do it alone. So for me, and the other thing I should share, of course, is that I met my guides on the subway, on the London Underground, going to work. Again, I would have thought should have been in Peru or at some yoga retreat, and it didn't happen for me that way at all. It happened for me in the middle of a rush hour commute to my then job in fundraising at the time, and it just came in like a blast and never left me since.
So you've been channeling the Z's for over 20 years. We know that the communication started on the subway. What are they sharing with you? I mean, we talk about one of the topics that I would like to discuss is what's happening in the next decade. This is a pivotal time for humanity. What messages have you got through in regards to where we are and what might be coming?
It's interesting. I've channeled a lot over the years on the topic of the future, but doing this book, The Future Human, with Regina Meredith from Gaia, who many will be familiar with for her show Open Minds, if you've ever had a Gaia subscription. And
Definitely
Regina also has
that out. So if you guys have Gaia, go in and check out the interview and look at Lee Harris's work. And obviously we're going to share a bit more about that a little bit later. But yeah, back to you, my friend.
Yeah, Regina has interviewed so many people like over the years, and she's very interested in researching all of the hidden, all of the underneath. And so the book that we decided to do together was to basically look at everything. And it's very much led and guided by Regina's questions. And I only knew what a few of them were before we got started. And then I said, I don't want to know, let's just do the sessions. So while I was channeling the Z's, she asks all of these questions to do with AI, to do with the future of the body and human health, to do with the future of governments and power systems, the future of war on this planet, and at what point does war start to die out. And so it's very long range in the book. Some of the things that are spoken about relate to the next decade. Some of them are decades and decades ahead. And there's a lot in there. But what I'll say about this decade that we're in now, the Z's always told me, and this came out at a public event in London in 2016, they said 2017 to 2024 were going to be game-changing years on the planet. And it was going to set us up for a whole new game on Earth. And they use the word game not in a dismissive or a disparaging way, but they'll often refer to it in that way. And we then went through COVID and everything from 2020. So I was curious, what's that going to be? What's that going to look like? But they also maintained that from 2025 onwards, even though, if you like, fight for the light. It's a weird thing to say because, as they say, the light and dark are in a constant relationship with each other and they use and need each other in a way. So fight for the light is a very simplistic way of putting it. But they said that even though that battle that we see playing out on Earth between lower consciousness and higher consciousness, those people and groups that want to take us back in time into deeper control of humans, and the many, many individuals on Earth who don't want that and are creating a new future, they said from 2025 onwards, even though the battle will not be over, they said you will see increasing evidence of innovation, new ways of being, new energy beginning to take place on Earth. And that will go all the way up to 2030, which is another big shift moment for the planet. So this next 2-3 years is very much about dismantling. And even though I think our human reaction, particularly if you're paying attention to the media, which is always slanted and biased in the way that it reports things and usually has an agenda, it can look quite horrifying what's going on. And some of it for sure isn't good. You definitely know that a lot of things that are happening are not benefiting certain groups of people at all. But behind all of that, there is a dismantling of what we knew as the old world. And we can't go backwards now. That consciousness is higher. It is increasing. We are right now at that point of people evolution and revolution. And what will people stand for? What will we as a people stand for as we go through the next 2-3 years? And so that's going to be very much on the table between now and 2027, this experience of greater people revolution, which is really people wanting to have a say in what happens here on the planet, and that we have been trained out of believing we have a say or believing we have an effect. And what the Z's are always saying is you as a group are far more powerful than you even realize or understand, which is why you have also been convinced of a certain kind of system that doesn't give you a voice. So often in the work and the messaging that they bring through, yes, they do sometimes talk about things going on the planet, but probably not unlike you with your work, Espen, they're very focused on who we can become and how we can become more of ourselves, how we can heal faster from what we have imbibed and let it go so that we can become the next level of ourselves.
Oh, I love that. So if there are these benevolent forces assisting the human species in our ascension, in our healing, in our coming home, would there also be such a thing as a benevolent, as in dark forces deliberately trying to slow us down, potentially extraterrestrials, or is this just our own creation?
They say that as above, so below. So they say just discernment is required everywhere. And I think it's interesting, isn't it? We often have this idea of, I've seen two things with people relying on outside entities for advice or guidance. I've seen people completely give their power away and get pulled around, or believe that spirit is in charge, which the Z's always say, no, we're not in charge. No, you're in charge. You're more in charge than you realize. But I've also seen a lot of programming in our culture around we're supposed to fear spirit. So I think in some ways your question leads me back to that imprint that we all have of, can we trust this? And my argument is always, what do you feel? And more importantly, not just your feeling, how do things play out in reality for you with this advice? So when people have contacted their guides or higher self and they're getting messages and information, I always say, study it. I studied it for years. I studied what they were saying and I checked how it was applying in my life or not. But in the bigger picture, to your question, they say absolutely. There are those who are invested in this planet having its breakthrough in consciousness, and there are those who are not, who do not want it to go that way. And we see that playing out here on the ground as well as energetically.
Do you know which dimension or star system or kind of intelligence the Z's come from?
They come from a few different. So the way they refer to them, they say we're a group of 88 beings, but we then extend wider into source. So the way they've explained it to me is when I'm channeling them and some information needs to come through, there are a group of them, some of whom have been incarnate on Earth. Many never have. Others have been incarnate in other places, but they say, think of us as a voice of galactic source and a consciousness library. They say that is our job. Our job is to receive information, bring it through, and deliver it to those of you on Earth who are asking for a certain energy or answer to come through to open you to your next phase. So no, they're very hybridized in that way, because I know there are other channelers out there who will say, oh, I'm channeling Jesus, or I'm channeling an ET, or no, they've always said we are a large group for a reason, because their personality is not so important. I think with other channelers, the personality is important. But with them, they say, we're beyond personality for you. That's not really what we're working on.
I love that. Okay, what are some of the messages that you've got from them over the years, and maybe from the book that you've done, Future Human, that we need to keep an eye on individually moving forward? What are some of the things that we need to focus on in order? And I want to get to the heart in a moment, which is a separate topic, but outside of that, what would you say?
One of the earliest teachings they gave to me and some others, which was very helpful at the time, was they said, if you catch yourself judging yourself, celebrate it. Don't use it as a beating stick to further be annoyed at yourself. Celebrate the fact that you've developed enough awareness to be able to notice the inner critic and notice the inner judge, because they say it's so woven into the fabric of our society that it's something that all of us have inherited. Firstly, usually as a survival technique or as a way of protecting ourselves from being judged. So often we created the inner critic to protect ourselves from whatever criticism we felt coming our way in childhood. And then we make that inner critic very strong as a protection device. But as we go through life, we can release it and let it go. So that was one of the first things I remember that really got my attention as someone who was very critical on myself back in the day. And especially you can get into that mindset, I think, as a spiritual person or as a person who's focused on self-growth of, wow, why am I here again? Or why is this coming up again? But two things, healing is layers. So we get better at dealing with another layer as we go through life. And also you often have to try it on for size in order to move it out of your body. So you almost have to sometimes become what you perceive as regression to test out your lower level. They always say as we elevate, we have to then deal with the basement. So if you think of us as a moving force and we're going up, 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 there will come a point, it's quite natural and quite logical that you will then hit either a roadblock or a step back. And that is part of the process, which I don't remember anyone really explaining to me. I think I came much more from a self-growth culture of what's your resistance? If this is coming up, it was a slightly more human framework back then. That's one of the things that they always like to say. They say that we came from an octave of, they call it the high harmonic of oneness, and that we come from that oneness connection. So everything we're doing is trying to get back to connection, and every wound we feel is to do with separation, which I know you've mentioned as part of your work. I think that's the area that we're having to heal, to come back to our telepathy, our interconnectedness, our ability to be more at one with all of these other dimensions of information. But we have been trained through our human training and our human minds to make everything so small. So they're always bringing us back to that truth. And yet they also say that when you die, you'll want to come back here. So even though you might sometimes think there is a better world after death, and that I have seen many people believe that or want that or say, why am I still alive? They say, no. The focus, the intense focus of being human is very unique. And they say in the universe, it's a very unique form and way of experiencing yourself as consciousness at this time, which is why so many other planets and systems are interested in what's going on Earth right now, because it will have a ripple effect. So those are just a few of the things that come to mind. But as for the book, The Future Human, one of the things that I found interesting was they talked about AI being an ancient technology that's returning to us just in a new form. They said it's a form you've never seen before, but it's actually an ancient technology, and that, like anything, it's going to depend on how it's used, who it's used by, what it's used for. But it's actually a part of our acceleration as a species and everything becoming faster. I'm just trying to think if there's any other tidbits that pop out from the book right now. No, maybe some will come when we keep speaking.
Beautiful. Thank you. It's very interesting you should say that, because when I first started studying AI, I sat in meditation and a moment came through, just a moment of clarity. And the moment was, it's nothing artificial about intelligence. It's not artificial. We didn't create it. It's always been there. We're just learning how to tap into a new bandwidth of information. So I call it digital intelligence. And it's been very interesting working with it and seeing both sides. But now that it's getting to know me, it's incredible. And I cannot pass much judgment on it, rather than say, I don't want to believe everything that I read or receive, let alone understand it as a form of intelligence. So any other notes on AI that you've received?
Well, on that note, one thing that they did talk about during the AI session of the book is they talked about the importance of the soul. and how we as a humanity are here to not exactly safeguard the presence of the soul on Earth, but it's very important for us to bring forth soul on Earth. There are some groups who wouldn't mind seeing it become a very technological planet, because through technology they may be able to do certain things. What I should say about those groups too, because you asked, are there people, for humanity and against humanity? One thing they've said over the years a few different times, and they still say it today, is that these groups are also, in a way, destroying each other. I think I've met some people over the years who are quite scared about what's going on in the world, as if there is one villain at the top of the world system controlling everything. And they've always said, oh, no, it's multiple groups vying for control. And both because of that competition between themselves, and also because they said where consciousness is going now, truth comes out. You can no longer hide or deceive the way you used to be able to. And so they said, not only are those groups going through their own reckoning, because I think sometimes people in the spiritual community think they've got more power, or should I say, fear that they want to do is already happening and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And the Z's have said, no, it's not that locked in, it's not that grounded. They will try. And the question is going to be, what kind of damage do we incur along the way? But they said it can't be that that's your outcome. It's just not possible with where the energetics are on Earth.
Oh, I love this. I say the same thing to my students in my events. We say that those in power, and I say in order to say that, define power. If you mean power is wealth and control and dominance and suppression, then yes. Power is the power of love, the power of consciousness. So when you say those in power, you may project that outside of yourself, but those in power are really those who harness that unconditional love of the soul. I say the soul is the state of unconditional love. And those who harness the power of light and consciousness, that is true power. So maybe we need to reconsider what those in power mean and maybe have a look in the mirror, is what I say to people. I want to ask you, Lee, if I can, you speak so beautifully on this topic. And this is something that I believe for me is going to be a pivotal and is a pivotal transition in our ascension or coming home or embodying light or heaven on earth or whichever we want to call it. And it's the role that the heart plays in this process and will continue to play in the upcoming years. Can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I guess the simplest way to put it is when your heart is open and open to the people standing in front of you, you operate in a very inclusive way. You understand that the success of one is the success of all, and the failure or the loss or the suffering of one is the suffering of all. And of course, the way we've been raised as a society, very few of us have been asked to feel or think globally. We have borders, we have countries, we have wars between countries, which of course aren't from the people. They're manufactured by the people at top, usually because of resources or things that are wanted in that country, which is not necessarily the story that we are told as to why we are going to war with another country. So when you come from your heart, you're very inclusive and you're very present, and there is no need for scarcity or competition or many of the things that are hardwired into us. And they're also hardwired into our systems. It's not that we can all live off the land right now. If all the systems went down, many are not in a position to support themselves, which is also an important thing for people to understand about this time and about why the systems of power that we have given our power to and have agreed to be a part of the system, it has to be held accountable as well by us. It's not that we have a mom and dad who are just taking care of everything and we can just get on with our lives, which I think is often the state that we've been encouraged to be in. So heart consciousness, they say it's that heart energy is the currency of the future. And it's funny, you said something in the question that made me think, isn't it interesting how the people that we remember in our lives, they're the ones, it was the moments of heart. Sure, you may also remember the ones who traumatized you or the ones who created a lot of wounding, but we tend to remember. They always say that quote, people will forget what you do or what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And I always know when I'm in the presence of someone who's in their heart, because you feel safe, you feel present, you don't feel there's some kind of manipulation going on from the mind to try and get something out of you or herd you a certain way. So a big part of our healing process or our awakening journey is to get us back into our hearts. And usually there is a journey for all of us of undoing some of the wounding that we've individually and collectively incurred and inherited just by the nature of being born into this planet.
Oh, I love this. This is very, very cool and so beautiful. When I had a burnout, so I burnt out. I had adrenal fatigue in 2016. I was successful in my business and whatever else and financially. And then I went empty. Okay. What does one do when one feels empty? I guess there's connection needed. And so I started being still and listening and receiving and just peeling back the layers, really. And I witnessed within my own revelation an whole system out of the Vedic teachings that spoke to how certain lower frequency emotions and traumas would block the life force that moves in us. Fear blocks the first energy center, guilt blocks the second, shame blocks the third, grief blocks the heart. And so I developed a curriculum to kind of guide people through the lower frequency emotions to connection to source and love. I want to ask you a little bit about the process of the heart in that, because I think often people think that it should just be all airy fairy and love, but sometimes also we recognize that going through the grief, for example, is part of that healing. When it comes to the heart, what are your thoughts on what we've just discussed?
The Z's refer to grief as the great transformer. They call it grief, the great transformer. And they say that when grief opens up in us, let's say the catalyst is the loss of a beloved pet or the loss of a friend or a relationship, a romantic relationship ends. And there will be certain times in our life where grief will take us to our knees, because once a grief window opens in you, if you are ready and it's the right time, all the old grief that you never felt will pour through. It won't always happen that way. The grief might be more brief and contained, but it sounds like this moment you're describing was one of your big moments. And by the way, I also had adrenal fatigue in about 2014. It's a great teacher, isn't it? It's a great humbler, and it really helps you change your patterns, because you go, how did I get here? Oh, I see. And for me, it was kind of a misplaced sense of responsibility to the work that needed to update, which is common for a lot of people who do healing work. I think you have to get into the right place with it. And where you end up is not usually where you start or how you start. And that's fine. That's the rite of passage. So grief is this incredible energy that we go through. And the Z's say, usually when you're in grief, you feel like nothing is happening in your life, that you have pulled back from life, that you have shut down from life. And they say, it's the most potent chrysalis time you can go through, because everything that is now composting inside you or releasing and shifting, you're going to come out the other side and your energy field will not be the same. So therefore, even if you return to the same relationships, the same situations, within months, you'll see either improvements or transformations within them, or you'll also see some of them fall away, depending on how relevant they are or aren't for your future. So grief in the heart is huge. And I think one of the things I know is true about grief for many of us is when we lose someone we love, even if it's someone who's in their, let's say, 80s or 90s, which is not usually a shocking age for us that someone has died. There's a lot of acceptance that, okay, well, that's about the age that people start to die. But I think it's a very sobering thing, particularly when you lose, say, a parent. Because if you haven't been touched by loss of someone you love and are connected to before, it completely changes the game of Earth for you, because you suddenly go, one day they're not going to be here anymore. And God, I hope that day is decades away. But we all know that random things can happen and that people get taken off the planet all the time. So I think it puts you into a certain level of presence and appreciation. And back to your question, this concept of love, I know I, for years, associated love as a doing. It was something I did towards other people, or it was some way I showed my love to other people, or I connected with other people. And then at a certain point, I realized, oh, no, the feeling of love is just that feeling of where you just sit and you can just be open and you can feel, and it's so spacious. And I've had a few times in my life, 3 major awakenings in my life at different ages. The last one was 6 years ago, where everything just went away. Everything that I associated with or identified. And I suddenly just realized how much I in this body, in this energy field, are a part of every plant and every building that I see. And there's just this endlessness. And those have, the longest one for me lasted about a week and a half. The shortest one will last less than an hour. But when they happen, it's a reminder of like, everything that's here is a flow. And so for me, I always think of love as flow. There is a flow to love. in that it's just a bit like, you know, when you float in the ocean and you just let your body be carried by the ocean for a while. That to me is the feeling of love. And sometimes I see people working very hard to create love, which usually is more of an attachment or a behavior. Another time you look at someone, it's always the quiet person that gets me. You're in a room or you're on a public transport or something, and you just see one person who just stands out to me because they're there and they're just smiling, just to themselves, in themselves, not thinking about, they're just, and you, those people always catch my, I'm like, wow, because you feel their presence. They're in the presence of being present with love and life, which I think is really what love invites us to do.
I love that. Thank you for creating some distinction between doing and being. Doing love rather than being in love.
It's hard, right? It's definitely, I know for me, it was so wired in what love was. And I think we also get sold this story of romance, which is a shame because I don't remember. I mean, I'm older than you, but I'm 48 now. I don't remember as a kid people explaining to me the beauty of friendship, the way they asked me to focus on the beauty of a romantic relationship, or one day you'll get married and you'll have kids. And that was always kind of heralded as the ultimate prize, which in a way is its own form of separation, because it makes us think, oh, there's going to be this one person and it's all about them and it's all about me and them. And it's a recipe for failure and heartbreak, because the truth is, even if you are blessed enough to have a wonderful partnership in your life, if the partnership is really working, it won't be all about them. And it won't be all about you and them. You and them may be the center, but actually it's what the two of you can co-create and co-experience. That's the richness with all the people around you, whether you have kids or not, whether it's your friends. And the Z's said something along these lines. We were doing a retreat in Blue Spirit, Costa Rica in 2019, and there was this slightly provocative channeled message, which they can be sometimes, where they said none of you would care about romantic relationship if you lived tribally. They said, we're not saying that it wouldn't still exist, that people come together. And of course, people come together to make children as well. But more than that, I think too much of that has kind of been, who was it I heard once dismissing same-sex relationships because they said the point of a man and a woman is to make a baby. And I thought, God, if the Z's could hear you, their eyes would roll, because that's so, I mean, really? You think that that's, well, then why do we need to be here for 80, 90 years? And why is most of our time not spent having sex, which is the thing that can make the baby? So I just found that very interesting, that kind of reductive view. But they did say you would still find love with each other and you would still have important one-on-one friendships and romantic relationships. But part of the pain around romance is because you don't live tribally enough. You've been separated and segregated from each other in the ways that you live. Which is why I think when we do a retreat, when I've attended them or when I've run them, there's something magical about going really deep in a big group. And provided the retreat is well run, you don't have a, let's say, a lesson teacher running the retreat. They come along every now and then where you pick someone who's more of a lesson to you than a facilitator. But if the retreat is well run, then there should be a cohesion by the end of that week between the hearts and minds of everybody, and a new level of love and acceptance, which is why I think there's often that pain about leaving a retreat. It's like, oh no, I've got to go back to the real world. And the Z's always say, now you go and apply this and you go and spread this and you ripple this. So yeah, I often end my retreats and workshops with the phrase, go forth and multiply, because it's what the Z's have said a few times. So some people laugh at that because they think, I mean, go ahead and make babies, but it's not that. It's kind of take this energy of love and multiply it.
I love it. Have the Z's shared anything about our subtle energy system? For example, my presentation at Gaia recently, I shared how, and many people would know this, if we put our body under a microscope, we're made up of 99.9% pure empty space. We are electromagnetic light beings occupying a physical reality in a physical body temple. Have you learned anything or received any information about how to activate the subtle energy bodies? Like, for example, the so-called scientists say that 98% of our DNA is junk. We know it's not junk. I say it's dormant light codes ready to be awakened. We have the chakra system, the subtle energy bodies, and so on. And what have you received or learned in regards to the aspects of us that we may not be able to touch and see as such?
The light piece comes up a lot. So they often speak about we are a crystalline body, and that in 2013 there was a channel they did called the crystalline body, and they basically said you're now moving into your crystalline phase, which is why you will see telepathy and some of the psychic senses beginning to return en masse in a bigger way. They will be some of the first. And part of the reason they will be some of the first is because it comes adjacent to the mind. And the mind is one of our strongest areas because it's where we've all been trained to be, pretty much. So they've talked about that. And they've also talked about, as we go through the coming decades, we will see increasing knowledge around healing with light. They talked a lot about infrared. And they talked about some of the different, and I can't remember all the details now, I'm afraid, because I haven't read the book for a little while. But I know they went into some detail with Regina about different healing modalities that are going to, in a way, return to us. Again, they're very ancient, but they will be put into modern technological forms and they will come back. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else over the years that they have talked about the subtle energy field. One of the challenges, Espen, is because I've channeled publicly for 21 years, there's so much out there on recordings that I don't retain. Yeah, as people will quote things to me and I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I don't remember that, but that makes sense to me when I hear it. But the piece about light, the fact that you bring light up, they talk about that a lot, that we are far more light than we perceive ourselves to be. And this doesn't so much relate to energy centers, but they have in relation to that said that even when you're really struggling or in a really heavy place in yourself, you perceive yourself to be at the lowest you normally are in your thoughts, emotions, feelings. They say if you could only see that what you're doing is focusing in on this tiny, tiny part of your consciousness and the rest of you is still pure light, still open. And it's all about where you direct your focus, which is why directed healing works so well. When we really get behind our own healing, whether it's through words and affirmations, whether it's through intent and of course through action. Because I know you're a very physical guy and very much about fitness and health as well. And they talk about that being a really important next frontier for us as a world. The health of us as humans has been greatly challenged, particularly over the last 100 years. And they talk a lot about the toxins on the planet as well. And this comes up in the book, and how a lot of those toxins can and will be reset, but there needs to be a choice about doing that. And there needs to be a break in the stranglehold of those systems that are, in a sense, poisoning different parts of the planet and therefore any species on the planet.
Beautiful. So we're going towards, and please do correct me if this is not accurate, are we going towards the Great Awakening? Are we coming into the crystalline body? Are we going to fill up with light, let go of the old trauma, and come back to fourth, fifth dimensional light embodied beings? Is this where the Z's say that we're having?
They would say that the fifth dimension is already with us and many of us are living in it. Doesn't mean you're always in it all of the time, but it has become quite commonplace on the planet. They would say we are in the Great Awakening, and they've always said we only need 30% of the population to wake up to their potential, and not just their potential, also part of the Great Awakening. And this is something I've got clearer about maybe over the last decade. I didn't understand this 20, 30 years ago. Part of the Great Awakening is the seeing of where and how we are being stopped, which I know can be a little unpopular for certain spiritual people, because I understand the trauma of some of the dark things that play out for us as a planet. It's not necessarily where everyone is designed to look. Some people are built for it, and it's what they're here for. They're here to be activists against it. But others would rather stay in a higher frequency, and that's okay. You choose where you need to be, and there are people who are literally meditating quietly in their homes for the world and for everybody right now. But equally, part of the Great Awakening is people waking up to see the problems. And so it's been interesting since 2020. I feel like we've had a massive increase in people seeing under the hood, where previously no one thought there was anything wrong with the car, or what was wrong with the car didn't seem like that much of an emergency. And now we're in a very different phase of time. So they've said once we hit 30%, then it's the tipping point, and it moves very fast through the rest of society. And they said in 2021, we were at about 23%, or 23 or 24, if I'm not mistaken. That was in one of the Conversations with the Z's books.
Wow.
So yeah, so we're approaching it.
We're heading there close. That's really, really cool. Okay, I just want to mention this. I know a lot of people are going to be loving this conversation because I, for one, can sense your authenticity. I can sense your presence and your heart, and the messages are incredible. And to co-author with Regina and write the new book called The Future Human, I think it's phenomenal. And what a great time to get this out. So I just want to point this out. The book is called The Future Human, New Ways of Being and Living on Earth. Okay, and that's now available. Is that correct? So people can go
It
to
is.
Amazon and get the
It
book right
is.
away?
I believe in Australia and the UK, the book comes out around the end of April. However, the Kindle version and the Audible version are available worldwide. And just for people who like to listen and feel energy, the Audible version is the actual conversations as they took place. The book was then turned into the book from the conversations. So, unlike traditional where people often narrate their books after they've written them, this was the other way around. So, if you listen to the Audible, you will hear Regina speaking to the Z's live as it happened. Yeah.
That is so cool because that means that it's not filtered. It's just obviously
Mm-hmm.
filtered through your mind as it comes through into English language, but that's just pure transmission. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it's called The Future Human. You jump on your Audible, you get the book, you listen, you learn, you embody, if this has been useful. And also one thing, by the time this episode airs, and we've got people around the world following, but also a big following here in Australia, you might have already been here, but you do run some really amazing events, channeling events, and so on and so forth. So we'll just talk quickly about that, and then you and I can hop on and do a separate video to my database and try and invite as many people to come and experience these transmissions. But just tell us a little bit about the events that you're doing in Australia and around the world and how people might be able to get access to those.
Yeah, so we are bringing our Big Love tour, which we've taken across North America and Europe. We're bringing it to its final destination, New Zealand and Australia. So Auckland on April 16th, and then we start in Byron Bay, April 1st and 22nd. Both of those shows are already sold out. And then we have shows in Brisbane, Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney. And I think Brisbane is sold out. One of Brisbane or Adelaide is sold out. I can't remember which one. But I'm thrilled. I haven't been back to Australia since 2016. We were planning to come at the end of 2020, and then we all know what happened. So the Big Love Tour is the 3-hour experience that I bring my musical partner, Davor Bozique. So he not only underscores when I channel or when we do a guided meditation together to open you to your own soul, we also have songs that we have created over the years to support people's awakening. So we place those through the evening, and I take audience Q&A, and I bring in the unique themes for each city at every single event, much like my energy updates that I do on the first of every month on YouTube. I always get 8 themes for the month. Well, I do 3 themes per night for that city, which come to me about an hour before everyone walks in. So it's a very well-rounded evening, and that ends on May 2nd or May 1st, I believe, in Melbourne. And then my next event after that, my next major event will be Soul Magic, which is a 6-day immersion. And it's basically energy mastery with channeling, with energy mastery sessions. I've got Anita Morjani as a special guest this year. We're teaching on the power of the sensitive. Stephen Washington does Qigong sessions each day, and Davor will be with me, and we will do music, and we will also sing together sometimes, which is not to scare anybody. It's just good for you. So, yeah.
Very, very good. The human voice is significantly underused and
It is.
underrated, I think. Yeah.
It is. So, yeah, Soul Magic is in July 6th or 7th, I believe, in La Jolla, which is right by San Diego.
Beautiful. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, you want to learn more, on Facebook is Lee Harris Energy 888. I love that. 8 is my number as well. The website is leeharris.com, energy.com.
Yeah.
Check it out. And Lee Harris Energy in one word on Instagram as well.
Perfect.
Now, one more thing, I just want to check in. I love this stuff. You say that once a month, you're doing this energy update on YouTube? Where can we find that? Is that Lee Harris Energy as well?
Lee Harris Energy. So if you go to the main website, you can reach everything. But yeah, Lee Harris Energy on YouTube. I've been doing these video energy updates now since 2012. And every month I pull on the 8 themes that I get given by the Z's, and I teach on them for about 25 minutes to give people a kind of in-depth reading for the month ahead and what they may have just gone through in recent weeks as well.
Wonderful. Okay, I've got one last question for you, and then we'll do a little video for our audience and see if we can. I mean, you're already sold out in many cities, but if you want to get some information out to the Aussies and New Zealanders, we can certainly do that. I've got one last question for you straight off the cuff, if I may. Okay. I want you now to imagine that you are on the world stage Every sentient being alive has gathered, watching, listening, tuning into your message. When you're ready, take a breath and share whenever you're ready. What is your message to the world right now, please?
We are remembering love. And so any place, person, or thing that we can do that reconnects us to a feeling of love and well-being is exactly where we each need to go. And that's every single day, every single moment. And if we can keep following that and also noticing where we are playing a game of non-love with another person or another thing in our life, to gently investigate that and let it release and heal so that we can come back to our true nature, which is divine love.
And so it is. Lee Harris, everybody, Lee Harris Energy. And follow, like, share far and wide. It's been a privilege, my friend. Thank you so much for having
Thank you
us.
so much, Espen. I really appreciate it.